Step, guys, our next step is going to be, and remember, it's a good thing we brought this up because we're moving towards something like this. We are going to create a folded surface that has some compound geometry in it, or complex geometry, whatever you want to call it, but also has some geometry that's going to be mapped into it and subtracted from it. So one of the things that I wanted to get at here is that you notice that these types of geometries are actually inside of what you see as the form here. So to do part of that, at least one method of doing part of that, is to test it by inclusion. Okay, so what we're going to do is set up a grid and draw a profile curve and then delete information or geometry that is not included in the enclosed profile curve. Okay, so it sounds complicated, but it's really not. All right, so let's get started. To start us off, I'm going to work in the top view, right? Because now we're abstract. We're working very simply in the x and y axis or xy plane. So I am going to set up using a grid, basically a set of points or circles, a pattern of sorts, right? So you could open up your old pattern or you could create a new one with me. I'm creating a new one so you get some practice. So under vector grid, I dropped in a square grid. And on this square grid, I'm going to make the cell size anywhere from 0 to 10, I guess. I probably want more subdivisions, so I'm going to do 0 to 30 subdivisions. Oh, sorry, not 0 to 30. It would have to be 1 to 30. All right, so I now have a grid. And if you recall, when I created circles on the grid, all I had to do was find the points and plug circles onto those points. And that's as simple as going to curve, primitive, circle, and plugging into the base point the points of the grid. Boom. So by now, this kind of thing should start to be a regular procedure for you that you could do on demand like that. Kind of. Booting up, yeah, that's okay. We're recapping right now, so I have no trouble believing you can get caught up with us pretty quickly. So, think back to what we did again last week, right? We looked at patterning exercises and scaling by a couple of different factors. So I'm going to create another pattern. I'm going to repeat that pattern so that it does it as many times as I have circles. And then I'm going to make sure that it expands the data, repeats the data the way that I want it to. So if you recall, I went under params and I used a panel to create a pattern. So I'm going to create a pattern right now that says 1. And I believe our maximum is going to have to be 2.5 since the circles are in cells.
How did you make the panel in params? I'm sorry.
Under params and input, it's this one right here, panel. So because my cell size is 2.5, or sorry, it's 5, my radius can only be a maximum of 2.5. So I'm prescribing a couple of preset diameters that I'm going to use here. So I'm going to say 1 and 2, 1.25, 0.5, and 2.25. So now I plug that into, sorry, not radius, doesn't need to be multi-line. Yeah, sorry, I forgot. Part of the instructions here are that when you have a panel that is triggered as multi-line data, that are not as multi-line data, or the multi-line data is highlighted as blue, you have to turn that off so that it reads it as a list instead of multi-line text. Otherwise, it's going to give you an error saying that it's failed to convert from text to a number. So when you convert it from multi-line data, which reads it as text, to a list, then it will read it as a numerical input.
But how did you do that? Just by right-clicking?
Yeah, you right-click on the panel and you toggle multi-line data. We are going to make an inclusion profile. So we're first creating a pattern just like we did before. Then we're going to create a profile, like a curve, that will cut out some of the information. Yes?
Can you repeat what the point of including the panel is again?
So we can prescribe or tell it what the pattern's going to be. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and make sure we're all caught up to here before moving on. This should look familiar to you right now. And kind of still recapping from last week, we had to repeat that data so that it would give us as many repeats. Well, actually, there are two things. We need to make sure that we flatten the list so that we are sequentially numbering them instead of going by row. So if I flatten this, now you see that those modifications are now going linear along the y-axis right now. So we need to repeat this data so that it perpetuates throughout the entire list of circles. And do you remember where repeat data is? That's right. You don't need to remember it off the top of your head. This is only the second time you've seen it. So under set and sequence, repeat data. Repeat data. So repeat data is obviously going to ask for the pattern that it's going to repeat, but it will also ask you for the length of the pattern. So does anybody recall how you get the length of the pattern in an automated way? No, not area, not multiply. It's under list. That's right, list length. Okay, so read the description of list length. It says this. It says measure the length of a list. So basically, if I plug in the number of points to that, I get a numerical output of the count of how many of those points are there. So the list that I want to reference is my panel. So I'll plug that in. The list length is what I just pulled. And now you can see if I drop in another panel in order to just watch what's happening. I'm not going to pull it all the way down, but it repeats all that information 306 times. 1, 2, 1 1/4, 0.5, 2 1/4, 1, 2, 1 1/4, 0.5, 2 1/4, so on and so forth, 306 times. So now that list is the list that I want to plug in to R. And that is how we get this. I'll hide this so we can really see the pattern. I'll use that one. I like that one. Okay, so take a moment to kind of play around with the, you could change the size of the grid to make it more dense or less dense, and change what the actual pattern is reading. Something like this kind of changes the nature of it quite a bit. That's too tight. But just settle on a pattern that you like, and after a couple of minutes, we're going to go on to actually taking this pattern and turning it into something that you can exclude or include particular parts of it.